Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 30th of June. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather information for your community and village. You can do that easily online with NOAA Weather Radio or Marine VHF. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391 or find out information in between the shows on Alaska Weather on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. You'll get your daily afternoon map briefing, kind of a tease of what's coming up on the full Alaska Weather Show there on YouTube if you type in AKwx TV. And if you find us on Twitter, you can get information during the day or perhaps to just get some weather questions answered. It's an easy and quick way to communicate there, especially if you use the hashtag AKwx. Now, there's been some confusion about the burn bans around parts of Alaska. Some have been lifted, but those for southwestern Alaska and the municipality of Anchorage have not. Before you start burning anything, make sure you know what is allowed in your community, and the easiest way to check is call your local fire official or go to Facebook, NWS Alaska, and read the state fire marshal's list of places that have been lifted from burn bans and closures and those that have not. Again, that does not include a lifting of the closure for the municipality of Anchorage. We are still under a burn closure in the municipality of Anchorage at this point. Tonight's hazardous weather includes more smoke issues there for areas all the way from the Tanana Valley, the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, looking at some wind, and areas in the eastern Tanana Valley, all expecting to see periods of smoke. That trend will continue for the next couple of days as south and westerly winds continue to blow, and again, making some gusty situations there over some of the higher terrain. As you look out across the Bering Sea, you can still see the effects of high pressure carving in a very stable area here across the central and western parts of the Bering Sea. Another round of moisture is leaving eastern Asia. This will start to move toward the Gulf of Alaska as we get into the next several days. But in the meantime, very stable air across the Bering is preventing a lot of this from organizing into a stronger storm that could bring some very beneficial moisture to the heart of Alaska. As you look at the visible satellite picture, you can see there is one area of low pressure here that's kind of backing up a little bit more toward Kodiak. With that, we're getting some stronger and gusty southerly winds across a large portion of south central Alaska today. Southeast is bracing for this round of weather to move in from southwest to northeast as we head into Wednesday and Thursday. You'll see that on our surface weather charts here in just a little bit. Some gusty winds are expected, as well as some additional periods of rain. We've also been watching rounds of showers and thunderstorms develop across the Alcan border, Yukon, and areas around the middle and upper Yukon Valley, as well as isolated storms around the Alaska Range this afternoon. Things have been pretty quiet out across the west. Here's a look at the loop one more time, and you'll notice don't see the smoke as readily here in this picture as we were looking at yesterday, but it's still there, again, from southwestern parts of Alaska all the way toward the Alcan border. A pretty wide plume of smoke is easily seen if you're using the right satellite tools today. Here's a look at the surface chart, and you'll notice up across the Arctic coast, low pressure sitting up around 1,006 millibars. This front has moved eastward, but along it again, we've got smoke coming in. High pressure sitting just off the southwestern coast. Showers and thunderstorms have fired up along that boundary and are also seen from the northern Yukon to the middle and eastern Tanana Valley, as well as areas in the southern Yukon. Periods of rain have been seen around Prince William Sound and southwestern Alaska, around Lake Iliamna. And we saw a few showers around the central parts of southeast earlier today as high pressure is moving southward and making way for low pressure to start to move north and east. And across the western Aleutians, 1,001 millibar low, they're sitting across the western chain, bringing some rain to areas around Shemya and Attu and Kiska, with high pressure, though, clearly in command. You can see very stable air out across the Bering Sea at 1,021 millibars. Some showers are also seen around Norton Sound and closer to Nome. Tonight's forecast will lock in areas of fog again across the Bering, and we saw some dense fog across the Arctic coast today as well. That should continue. Showers and thunderstorms will be more concentrated around the Copper River Basin northward along the Alcan and around the eastern Alaska Range. We might see some spotty showers and thunderstorms to the west. Some of those could reach into the Bristol Bay region. Low pressure south of Adak, around 1,003 millibars, will bring in a stronger south and easterly flow with time as we head into tonight and tomorrow. Low pressure is also strengthening across the southern Gulf at 1,014 millibars. Again, this will be the system that tracks north and east toward southeastern Alaska as we go into Wednesday and Thursday. As we get into Wednesday afternoon, look for high pressure to develop just south of Homer at 1,021 millibars. That's going to stabilize the atmosphere and make it a lot harder for showers and thunderstorms to form, at least in the immediate area around south central. So periods of rain are a lot more likely with the clouds that you see rather than convective weather. Low pressure across the central Gulf will also bring in some warmer and wetter air to central and northern parts of southeast all the way up toward Cape Fairweather and Icy Cape, 1,009 millibars. This will bring some rough surf to areas around the northern sections of the outer waters there. Watch for those winds to come up again. You'll see that in the marine forecast. Watch for areas around the Chukchi Sea to also look for some light rainfall. Showers are expected across the Seward Peninsula and the Noatak and Kobuk valleys there, as well as the areas around the central chain there. That's a little bit more likely to be rainfall with a steady east and southeasterly flow. High pressure is still holding on to the northern parts of the Pacific as well as southwestern Alaska at 1,023 millibars, and we'll see as we get into Thursday that ridge kind of shifts into the Gulf and across southwestern Alaska at 1,021 millibars. Cold fronts dropping into the northwest coast again, and with that slightly cooler weather, we'll still get some rainfall across Barrow out toward Wainwright and point southward. Look for showers across the southern Bering Sea as well as the central and eastern chain in the Alaska Peninsula. Again, probably a very broad area of fairly light rainfall, and some of that could be showery in nature. 1,025 millibar high pressure system sitting across the Gulf will sit in place and probably break up a lot of the clouds there. In fact, places like Kodiak Island could see a little more sunshine as we get into Thursday. Showers are still possible around the Kenai Peninsula, and showers and thunderstorms around the Alcan border and probably into the northeastern Gulf there, and some of that could extend into northern parts of southeast. So watch for some of that to develop, especially along the offshore areas as this wave of low pressure is moving across the eastern parts of Alaska and making its way into western Canada. Fog will continue out west, and that should help to keep temperatures down as well. As you see way out in the Pribilofs, temps have held in the 40s. Meanwhile, in southeast, mild weather continues there with readings back in the 50s and 60s. Around Ketchikan and Annette, temperatures were in the upper 60s today. Around 57 degrees or so around Juneau, lower 60s for Haines and Skagway. Sitka saw temperatures closer to 60 degrees, about the same there for Yakutat. Prince William Sound was looking at temperatures in the mid to upper 50s today. Seward was 53, Homer 61, 60 in Kenai, and 64 around Anchorage, 70 in Talkeetna. Looked like Healy today made it up to 65 degrees with Fort Greely at 63. Northway was 59, 74 around Eagle, pretty toasty there, and 1 degree warmer in Fort Yukon. Fairbanks was looking at 67 with Tanana at 65. Anaktuvik Pass was in the mid-60s, even warmer up around Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse with temps there in the mid to upper 60s. 46 degrees was the daytime temperature around 3 o'clock, around 46 there in Barrow, and 57 around Atchison, considerably warmer once you get away from the water, of course. The Chukchi Sea coast was looking at temps from about 50 degrees in Wainwright to the lower 40s areas. You get around Point Hope and Point Lay. Kivalina was 47, Kotzebue 45. Nome was 44 degrees today, and as you got out toward Unalakleet, it was 60 degrees. Galena was showing 69 degrees, with McGrath in the mid-60s. Sparrowbond saw temperatures in the upper 50s, and a little bit further down the river there in Antioch, it was 63, 61 in Bethel, 46 in McCormick, one of the cooler spots yesterday, only in the 30s there yesterday morning, 45 in St. Lawrence. Bristol Bay temperatures were in the lower to mid-60s. The Alaska Peninsula was pretty much in the 50s and 60s, but you got all the way out to Dutch, and because of a lot of the clouds and low stratus that was hanging around, temperatures only made it up to the upper 40s by 3 o'clock, 50 degrees for Adak and Atka, and 45 in Shemya this afternoon. Now, low temperatures will hover in the mid-50s for the interior tonight. It's going to be a very mild evening ahead of that boundary that's moving eastward. Look for 30s and 40s across the Arctic coast, low 40s for Nome, upper 40s to almost 50 degrees around Bristol Bay and Kodiak. Southeast looking at low temperatures tonight, closer to 50 degrees. Upper 40s and lower 50s for south central, including Prince William Sound and the Chain, mainly in the upper 40s at the Pribilofs and the lower 40s. Same goes for St. Lawrence Island. A high of 47 there in Gamble tomorrow. The Arctic coast in the mid to upper 40s. Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse could be a little bit warmer than that, though. Looks like Nome near 50 degrees, upper 60s, and lower 70s around the middle Tanana Valley as well as the upper Yukon Valley. Fort Yukon itself could be closer to 80 degrees tomorrow. South Central in the 50s and 60s, 58 in Kodiak, upper 50s and lower 60s for most of Southeast, and 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula as well as the Aleutians. The Pribilofs again closer to 50 degrees. Same goes for much of the YK coastline. Flying weather, we expect to see IFR conditions across the heart of the Gulf and maybe just nosing into places like Sitka tomorrow. Otherwise, MVFR from Craig and Klawock northward. Across the central interior, look for periods of IFR conditions, but MVFR will be considerably more widespread, especially in the morning. And MVFR conditions across the northwest coast, the Seward Peninsula, as well as the northern YK coastline and the Bering Coast for the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. Look for IFR conditions even further west than that. In AKwx Pass, we expect to see improvements during the day. Same goes for Adigan Pass. Expect VFR by the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, predominantly VFR, but watch for showers and thunderstorms to develop on an isolated basis tomorrow. Same goes for Rainy Pass. Watch for afternoon convection. Windy Pass right now looks to be mainly VFR. Again, no major threats for thunderstorms. Think that'll be a little bit displaced to the north and west. Same goes for Isabel Pass tomorrow. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions through most of the day. Tanita Pass looks to be VFR for your Wednesday. Portage Pass at this point looks to be MVFR. There will be periods of rain in the region. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see some improvements during the day. VFR conditions perhaps by the afternoon. Your freezing levels show a cold pocket of air sitting right across the northern Gulf, levels as low as 6,000 feet. But once you move inland and west, those levels climb as high as 8,000 feet. A little bit further east into the southern parts of the Panhandle, the freezing levels climb to 10, even 12,000 feet there. And way out in the west, you can see a little bit of cooler air nudging in across the western Bering. Those levels drop to about 8,000 feet, with the northwestern coast and Barrow closer to 6,000 feet for your Wednesday. Icing potential is pretty limited at this point, and once again, you'll have to climb pretty high up there to find some light isolated threats there. Above 10,000 feet for parts of southeast in the Gulf, across south central, the Susitna and Matanuska valleys included, as well as Cook Inlet, and areas just off the Chukchi Sea coast and the central Aleutians, looking at some light to perhaps isolated moderate icing threats there again, all above 10,000 feet for tomorrow. The jet stream shows our main weather driver here, the superhighway of weather, well south of Alaska here. We also have a trough of low pressure sitting across the Gulf with wind speeds there from 70 to 85 knots, and another trough working across the Arctic Ocean with 50-knot winds there. High pressure is trying to set up, though. The big question as we move into the weekend is, will we get a major weather pattern change in time for your holiday weekend, which could also bring hotter and drier weather to a large part of the state? Right now, the models seem to be in disagreement about that, but it looks like the warmer, drier weather that we were talking about for a good part of the holiday weekend might be backing off just a little bit. So that's good news for firefighting concerns. Not great news if you want to just sit out in your backyard and enjoy the fine weather. 9,000 feet, we see a south and westerly flow coming into northwestern Alaska with wind speeds around 10 to about 25 knots at their strongest across the Chukchi Sea. Low pressure sitting across the Gulf has stronger winds coming into southern parts of southeast at 40 to 50 knots. It slows down considerably across the northern Gulf, with southeasterlies coming into the central and eastern chain and the Alaska Peninsula between 15 and 30 knots, crossing the Pribilofs closer to 10 to 15 knots from the southeast. At 3,000 feet, a little bit of a different pattern here. Low pressure is still pretty much in the same spot across the Gulf. We still have a stronger flow on the south and eastern side. Wind speeds are light across the interior from the west and southwest, around 5 to 15 knots. High pressure slowing things down across the western Bering. And here you see some stronger winds crossing Atka, around 40 knots or so, with northerlies on the backside of that low coming in around 20 knots from Kiska to Attu, and the northwestern coast looking at 25 to 30 knot winds from the west and southwest. So once again, turbulence is not a major concern at this point. We'll be watching for isolated reports if we get convection going around the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys. Looks like some light possibilities there across the northwest coast below 5,000 feet, below 3,000 feet for the central chain, and above 2,000 feet with a developing area of low pressure there across the central and eastern Gulf. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned. Get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. what we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
when we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Toman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's the Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks, Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time. Who was that masked man? Today's Sea Ice Edge shows improvements across the Chukchi Seacoast. Again, the big news that we were talking about yesterday was the open water there just around Barrow and points westward. The Beaufort Seacoast, not so much. Still plenty of ice there, but it is thinning and changes will be had as we continue to warm up heading into the holiday weekend. Here's a look at the forecast now for southeast. Remember, we were talking about the winds changing direction because of low pressure working in from southwest to north and east, probably affecting areas around Cross Sound and northward. So watch what happens here. On Wednesday, we have light winds from the south across the Lynn Canal, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea, and 10 to 15 knot winds there across the inner waterways south of that. And across the outer coast, 20 to 25 knots, especially from Sitka and Cross Sound southward. 5-foot seas there outside of Dixon Entrance. And then here we get into Thursday, and the winds switch around to about 20 to 25 knots. There may be some areas that come up to 30 knots there, so watch for some changes as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. 20 to 25 knots, 4 to 9-foot seas there across Stevens Passage and into Cross Sound. 20 knots from the south and east around Clarence Strait with 4-foot seas. And if you haven't looked at sea surface temperatures there around Clarence Strait, again, they are really warming up there, so keep your eye on that if that impacts what you're choosing to do. South and southwesterly winds across Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 3-foot seas there. Otherwise, a very light and pretty variable flow from Prince William Sound to Shelikof Strait to the western Gulf outside of Resurrection Bay. Easterlies across the northern Gulf at 15 knots, northeasterlies from Kodiak Island across the eastern side there. And then that becomes westerly up to 25 knots. Wind speeds also pick up across Shelikof Strait, about 20 knots from the south and west, and that continues up Cook Inlet but diminishes as it heads further north, about 10 knots, 2-foot seas expected there. It'll still carry light and variable winds inside of Prince William Sound. Seas only around 2 feet, but a west and southwesterly flow should be expected across the northern Gulf and to areas east of the Barrens up to 25 knots, otherwise a 6-foot sea there. Across the Alaska Peninsula, light winds on the north side, 10 knots in the Bering Sea, more of a southwesterly push there inside of Bristol Bay. Also looking at light winds across the Pacific side, 3 to 5-foot seas. Winds will be a little more variable from Castle Cape out toward Chignik, a little bit more from the south as you head west of Chignik all the way out toward Falls Pass. As you get into Thursday, winds will come in from the west for Bristol Bay at 15 knots. From the east, a little bit further down the Bering Sea coast. Southwest from Castle Cape to Chignik at 20 knots with a 5-foot sea. And from the east, from Chignik westward, look for a 9-foot sea there across the North Pacific. As we get out toward the Aleutians, remember we've got low pressure also sitting right about here. That's going to continue working itself east and northeast. We have southeasterlies in the eastern chain and east and southeast flow for the central chain, around 25 to 30 knots with some of our higher seas there, around 11 feet. And then on the backside of the low, a northerly flow at 20 knots, 6 to 7-foot seas there on Wednesday. By Thursday, you can see low pressures now a little bit further to the south. That's going to draw in more of an easterly flow across the central and eastern chain, 20 to 30 knots there on the north and the south side. 7 to 10 foot seas in many areas there, otherwise 11 to 13 foot seas in the east. And that northeasterly flow still holding on at 20 to 25 knots with a 7 foot sea from Kiska out toward Attu on Thursday. For the west coast, southwesterlies coming across St. Lawrence Island with a 4 foot sea. Otherwise, winds will be fairly light from Kuskokwim Bay westward toward St. Matthew. 2 to about 3 foot seas there around the Pribilofs and the St. Matthew Island waters and north of Nunivak Island. As we get into Thursday, the winds become a little more southwesterly and they pick up speed again around St. Lawrence Island. 25 knots with a 5 foot sea there, and winds become easterly, sweeping around St. Paul and St. George with a 5 foot sea. That would put high pressure right about there. And again, that brings in a southerly flow across St. Matthew with a 4 foot sea. Wednesday, southerlies pick up a little bit more around Cape Lisburn and Point Hope, up to 35 knots with a 7 foot sea. Southwesterlies from Point Lay up toward Wainwright, and east and northeasterly winds across the ice in the Beaufort Sea at 10 to 20 knots for Wednesday. The winds change direction to the east around Kaktovik, and then points west of that still holding into a south and southwesterly component around 20 to 25 knots for Thursday. Seas will hold from 5 to 6 feet for the Chukchi seacoast as we head toward the end of the week. Recapping tonight's weather, showers and thunderstorms have been going on around the Alcan border and westward across the Alaska Range and points north as cooler air is trying to drop southward. We have a storm that's going to track north and east, heading for north and eastern sections of southeastern Alaska, going to tonight, tomorrow, and Thursday. And high pressure still in command of the central and eastern Bering Sea, keeping low stratus and fog around. Showers will sneak into the Seward Peninsula, and rain and low pressure working through the central and western chain will continue tracking eastward tonight. Stronger winds will be expected there tomorrow, nothing too horrible. And low pressure across the northern Gulf continues working itself north and east. That's at 1,009 millibars tonight and tomorrow, with showers and thunderstorms becoming a little more fewer and further between. There's a look at Thursday. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.